This video is about William Paley and the watchmaker analogy. And the watchmaker analogy is essentially an argument for the existence of God. And the man, William Paley, who forwards it, well, he was an Englishman in the 18th century. He was born in 1743 and he studied at Cambridge at the Christ College. And William Paley was a philosopher, a theologian, and he was also a devout Anglican. For those who don't know, that is the English Church, the Anglican Church, the Church of England. So the argument that he forwards is in the form of an analogy called the watchmaker analogy. And this was published in 1802, towards the end of his life, towards the end of Paley's life. And the book or the greater work in which it is published is called Natural Theology. And so, natural theology, what the reader can sort of, what this implies is that William Paley is seeking here to make a rational argument derived from the natural world for the existence of God, for this theism to be able to be created out of the natural world. And the analogy goes a little something like this. Say you're walking around a wood, and then on the ground, next to a rock, you find a pocket watch. And in the example of the book, there actually is a rock next to it. So he's comparing the watch to a rock, something in the natural world. And he says that upon finding this watch, it is reasonable to assume that there has been a watchmaker for the watch. Now, why is this? Why is it that we think of this when we find the watch, but we don't think the same of the rock? Because he says that the rock could have been there forever. We don't know who placed it, where it comes from. There are no clues based off of the rock that tell us that there was somebody behind the rock, a creator, an originator, a designer. But on the other hand, when you look at the watch, you look at the complexity of this watch and you look at the functions of the watch. It's got a transparent glass face underneath which is hidden the dial, which has these pointers that point towards different numbers that move in a consistent time interval. As 1 minute passes, the pointer moves a certain space on the dial. And so we can see from the watch that there is some intentionality here. There seems to be some systematic functionality to the object that we've encountered. Some clues as to it having been designed. And if you open up the watch, you suddenly see all this huge intricate structure of different components, of the different cogs, and the spring that's placed at the bottom of the watch set to relax at a certain rate as to start moving the other cogs so that they move at appropriate times to create the chains that we see eventually on the dial. And so the point of this analogy outlined by Paley is essentially that when you look at the watch, there is such complexity there, and such complexity placed in an order which allows for a very specific function of these numbers being displayed and being pointed to in a specific way by the pointers on the dial, that it simply would not make sense that this watch would have come out of thin air in that place. It just did not happen as a way of natural occurrences. There was a person, an agent, a designer, a watchmaker behind the watch. And what he does essentially here, William Paley, which is I think is brilliant when you really think about the critical thinking required to come up with this sort of analogy, and let alone 300 years ago. Well, it's that he's seeing this watch as a metaphor for the natural world. And he seems to sort of be saying that the natural world and the universe that we live in is of such complexity and has created such definite results for him. Remember, he was a theist, he was a believer, and he sees in people this determined intentionality of God to create these people. Why is there life at all on earth? Why do humans exist? He sees that this is, as it were, the time being displayed on the dial of the watch, this definite result. And then he looks at the huge, vast complexity of nature and the earth. And he says that in order for something this complicated to have been created with these specific results, there has simply to have been a designer behind it all. It's sort of analogous to the question in regarding the existence for God in metaphysics about why is there something rather than nothing? And it seems that William Paley is trying to say here that the reason that there is something rather than nothing, that there's a world at all, that the laws of physics were instantiated, invoked at the start of time, did not simply happen by chance. Somebody designed it. There's a designer, a creator, and that's what God is often referred to. And so what Paley is doing here is that he's making a teleological argument for the existence of God. Teleological as in telos, which means purpose in Greek, and then logos, which means logic or order, bringing order out of something. And so he's making an argument that there is a reason for all of these things on earth and for the natural world existing. And to sort of engage with this teleological argument for God, which is the watchmaker analogy, there is actually a modern equivalent, which I think is just as useful, if not more, to engage with, because it's more descriptive. It tells you sort of the meat of the ideas. Even though I think Paley's argument, his analogy of the watch and the watchmaker being the creator behind the universe, is incredibly useful for us as a sort of a first taste of the idea, and it's a very colorful account. It's very illustrative of the point. The modern equivalent of this is the argument from design for the argument of God's existence, and as you can hear, it's essentially the same argument. And one of the most prominent thinkers that forwards this today is William Lane Craig, who is himself a believer. And he says, essentially, building upon this idea of the watchmaker analogy and sort of connecting it to some of the things that we have learned in science, he says that the universe is simply too unlikely that this particular universe with this force of gravity has been created at random, that there has to be a purpose behind it. There has to be an agent that chose it, because the constants of the universe, the sort of mathematical numbers of the range that decides that there is the force of gravity, that physics works in a certain way. The physical laws of our universe, they are set up in a certain way at a certain bandwidth within a range of mathematical numbers that has to have been decided at one point in time. And there's obviously two different possible hypotheses. Either one, this is by chance, that this simply happened, that these were the numbers that decided the physical laws of the universe that eventually allowed planets to form, and gaseous planets, and then life to emerge. Or that there was somebody that actually is responsible for restricting these physical laws, the constants that determine the physical laws, to a certain range that enables life on Earth and the physical world at all to be able to manifest itself, to make itself manifest. And I myself am not fully convinced by this to say that it must be God. It must have been a designer that created these constants that make the preconditions for the universe existing at all. Because you could see that, like, if the force of gravity were not as it is right now, perhaps no like physical matter would be able to manifest itself in a way that would be able to support life, if you see what I'm saying. So he's saying, William Lane Craig, and Paley would probably say the same thing if he were privileged to these scientific discoveries, that it's simply too unlikely, 1 in a billion or a trillion or more, or higher mathematical numbers that we can't even fathom, that this would have happened by chance, that the laws of the universe are within this specific range, that it happened by chance. But I would say that chance happens once in a while. And what we also do not know, critically, what we do not know about this is, well, why weren't the laws of the universe different than they are? Why aren't they more conducive to life than what they are? What if it's the opposite? What if we are the result of a random act of chance that left this minuscule little possibility for life to evolve, and for not that much life to evolve across the galaxy and across the universe? Well, then maybe it's plausible that it's one of these possible iterations and manifestations of the constants of the universe that has led to our existence, since it's not that perfect that the theist paints it out to be. Perhaps there could have been, if we had sort of won the lottery in a better sense, there could have been more planets with more life and less suffering. That's also a possibility. And so this is sort of the thought train that I go down, and what makes me ultimately in the end think that, well, I'm not entirely convinced that the specific band of constants and numbers of the physical universe that is conducive to one planet creating life and of the universe existing, I'm not entirely convinced off of that fact alone that God exists and that there is creator. So this is my outlining of William Paley's watchmaker analogy, which I think is an incredibly useful analogy and sort of metaphor, visual resource to sort of engage with when thinking about this idea of the argument for the existence of God from design, which is what it's referred to in the modern day in philosophical discussion. And I wanted to share this with you. And please leave any comments down below. What do you think about this analogy of the watchmaker, the designer of the watch, and of our physical world and the universe? And yeah, thank you for watching.